Great Odin's Raven!
I feel the need for speed.
Ow! Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah!
Hey! Where did you get those clothes? At the toilet store?
And I thought my jokes were bad.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Miatc and the Chief. We got the Chief with us, of course. We're on a roll. We've had the Chief for a long time now. Haven't had an episode where we didn't have the Chief with us. Chief, what's going on, man?
Man, I'm just trying to continue this long show streak. I feel like I'm Lou Gehrig over here or something.
Cal Ripken, something. Speaking of Cal Ripken, that's actually a great segue into how we're going to start the show today. Because
it really is. Look at that.
Because we do have some teams in baseball. We are going to talk baseball today briefly. We have some teams that clinched playoff spots, one of them being Cal Ripken's former team, the Baltimore Orioles, clinched the American League East. Not even close in that division. They're up 13.5 games with, 10 or 11 left to play. So, obviously, not only do they clinch, but they're probably going to clinch just about. Well, they're not going to clinch home field because that's going to go to the LA Angels probably. I don't know if they've clinched home field yet, but they're in as well. So we got them in. We've got Baltimore in. We've got LA in. We've got Washington in the National League in. And then we've got some teams that are, pretty close to getting close to clinching. Not necessarily clinched yet, but we got some. Actually, everything else is pretty tight. I said that everything else is pretty tight. AL Central, you got Detroit and Kansas City fighting for a spot. The NL Central, you got St. Louis and Pittsburgh fighting. Milwaukee's kind of in there, but they're starting to tail off a little bit. And then you look at the West, and the Dodgers are up 3 games on San Francisco right now, but that's still a close division. And you look at the wild card. The wild card standings are, pretty tight. Kansas City right there with Seattle and Oakland. Both of those teams are really close in the AL. And you look at the NL, San Francisco and Pittsburgh have it right now. Milwaukee on the outside looking in. I guess we're not going to spend a lot of time on baseball, but Patrick, does any of that surprise you?
No, I don't think really any of this surprised me a little bit. I know I was on record. I don't know, when was the last time we talked about baseball? It was probably
before the summer.
I
think we talked about it briefly when we came back from the summer.
We I think,
but it's been a while.
Our summer recap, we may have talked about it. I don't know if you did, but I was kind of skeptical if St. Louis is going to make the playoffs or not. But right now, it looks like they're going to clinch the Central, which usually is not their cup of tea. They usually trying to clinch that wild card spot, but they're going to probably clinch the division. Fine with that. Dodgers, it's pretty safe to say they're going to clinch the West. It's going to be interesting to see who comes out of the second team out of the East. Obviously, Baltimore's clinched, as we mentioned. But could we see a resurgence of maybe a Toronto or a New York to clinch a wild card spot? Do the Mariners end their drought and clinch a spot? That's what I want to see. I want to see them back in.
Yeah, I think if you look out of the teams of the AL, and really the only team that I think that's on the outside looking in right now that has a shot is Seattle, because we have a big series coming up this weekend between Detroit and Kansas City, which could ultimately decide who wins the AL Central, which then could also decide if one of them slips out and Seattle moves up into that second wild card spot. Now, granted, I'm not looking at the Seattle schedule going in. They may have a tough schedule to finish out the season, but Kansas City playing Detroit's going to be a huge, huge series. Kansas City, I think what we were talking about, they play Cleveland and Chicago are the only other teams they play. They should be able to take care of those. So if Kansas City can sweep Detroit or win 2 out of 3, that division then probably becomes Kansas City's. So that's definitely a thing to keep your eye on this weekend. But also this weekend, we're obviously going to have some football. So we're going to talk a lot of football. Now, a brief side note, talking about the other football last night, just because I want to brag a little bit. My Seattle Sounders won the U.S. Open Cup last night, Patrick.
I saw that. I was keeping up with it on Twitter.
Oh.
Is that a three-peat I saw?
No. We didn't three-peat. We won, in 2009, 10, and 11. And then this is our first one in a couple of years. So we're excited about that. We're going for the triple, or the treble as it's called, the Supporter Shield, the U.S. Open Cup, and the MLS Cup. Got a long way to go. Clint Dipsey and Obafemi Martins both scored some huge goals to win and clinch that game. So good for me as a fan because we have a tendency to tail off towards the end of the season, and so hopefully that's the beginning of a good run here at the end of the season. But let's talk about the other football, American football, and we'll recap some games from last week. I guess really the big one, and we can mention our college pick'em. We may not want to mention too much, although everybody seemed to do okay in college football. Georgia, I think, is the game. Georgia versus South Carolina, I think, is kind of I don't want to say marquee game, but I know for sure, being a top 25 matchup makes it a little bit more marquee than some of the other games that were on the list, because there weren't a whole lot of just great games on that list. But Georgia going down to South Carolina, I know I picked Georgia. I know you picked Georgia. I think everybody else pretty much picked Georgia that did the pick. So I guess it's safe to say that was a little bit of a shock.
Yeah, I didn't get to watch that game. I don't know what game I was watching when that was going on. I think I may have been watching the ULM LSU game during that time, but I was keeping up with the score, and it looked like a dogfight as far as not too much defense, but a lot of offense. And I think that's what everyone was expecting. And so if that's what you were going in wanting to see, you got what you asked for, because it was a shootout pretty much the entire game.
Yeah, finishes 38-35, and I think I forget exactly what time. Oh, no, I know exactly what game I was watching. I was watching the Arkansas State game versus Miami, which we won't really talk about because Arkansas State ended up getting destroyed. Or not, I shouldn't say destroyed. They ended up getting beat. But yeah, Georgia went down early and then fights their way back in the fourth quarter, but falls a little bit short. And South Carolina ultimately holds on to win it. Do you think this gives South Carolina now the upper hand in the East, in the SEC East? I mean, they do already have the one SEC loss, but now Georgia has an SEC loss. I mean,
I don't know if any team has an upper hand in the East just yet. I think it's going to be whoever comes out of the season with the fewest bruises on their arms and injuries. That's who's going to come out, because it's going to be a very, very tough part of the SEC. I mean, any SEC schedule in any part of the SEC is difficult, but usually the West, we have a clear-cut favorite. In the East, most of the time we do. Sometimes we don't. This is the sometime that we don't, because Florida looks good. South Carolina, Georgia looks good. And it'll be a 3-team race all the way to the finish, I think. But I have no idea who's going to come out of this one.
Yeah, it's hard to say anybody has the upper hand in the SEC East. You look at the standings for that, and Georgia's got a loss, Vanderbilt's got a loss, South Carolina's got a loss. Vanderbilt, we're not surprised has a loss. I should be honest with
Vanderbilt's going to come out with probably 3 wins. So
if they're lucky. Missouri and Tennessee both haven't played an SEC game yet, but Missouri's 3-0, Tennessee's 2-1, and has looked pretty decent so far. Florida is hard to judge right now. They struggled in their first game with Kentucky, but they're also coming off of that canceled / postponed game because of weather, and so it's they're 2-0 right now. Hard to really tell what that team is at this point. So I think it's too early to say whether they're going to be good or not in the SEC. So I think it's got to be wide open. But I think South Carolina now owning the tiebreaker over Georgia gives them a little bit of an upper hand. Now, granted, they've still got to play Missouri. They're still going to have to play Florida. They're still going to have to play Tennessee even. So while it's not done, it's not a sure thing. I think South Carolina has the upper hand, but I still think it's wide open.
I think, and this is really strange and kind of a no-brainer to say, but I think whoever's the most focused during the entire year will come out of this one, because I can see where one team has kind of a sandwich game, if you will, to where they're playing like a Vanderbilt or a Kentucky or someone one week, and then the next week they're playing like a LSU or Bama or someone. They're focused on Bama, and then that Kentucky or whoever comes up and bites them in the butt and gives them an upset. And I can see one or two of those teams ending up with an upset or two on their schedule. Do I know who it is? No, I don't. But I can see it happening. And so that's why I'm saying whoever has the most focus, takes it week by week, won't have any troubles coming out of here with the least amount of blemishes on their schedule.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. As obvious as it may seem of a point, it's a really good one that teams should really take heed to. Not that anybody on any of those teams are listening to the show, but if for some reason they are, maybe, you never know, maybe they should take heed.
Maybe an intern is, you don't know.
Focus for every single game, because there are some dangerous teams in the East, even if they're not that good, or even if they're not that great. So focus on all your games. Don't get caught sleeping. Some of the other games we picked, and they were kind of the big games. UCLA squeaks by Texas, which I think is kind of I don't think this UCLA team is as good as everybody thought it was coming in.
They continue to prove that to us that they're not as good as everyone thought they were.
Yeah.
Well, especially with that game against Memphis and now this Texas game.
Well, yeah, and you give it a little bit of a pass because Hundley got hurt for a little bit, and Rick Neuheisel's son had to come in and play quarterback, and so you might give him a little bit of a pass on that. But UCLA does pull out the win. Penn State versus Rutgers, kind of a similar a game where just you didn't learn anything. Is that the best way to say that?
We didn't expect to learn anything either, though.
Well, yeah, that's true. Just kind of another game. Penn State wins 13-10. Not much going on there. You look at the other games. Tennessee loses to Oklahoma. I think while I did pick Tennessee in that game, I'll admit it, I picked Tennessee. I think I'm not surprised that happened. I am a little surprised at the scoreline. Oklahoma won, 31-10?
Yes.
I think, or no, 34-10, excuse me, which, not a bad loss, but not a good loss either, if there's a good loss. So I don't think we really learned anything there. It's a young team. Tennessee is. You kind of expect that they're either going to go into a place like Oklahoma and pull an upset, or they're going to go in and get beat by 24 points, and you're not really surprised either way. And then the last game we picked, Arkansas State Miami, was just kind of I don't want to say a throwaway game, but outside of me, I don't think anybody thought Arkansas State was going to win that. We did have some fun come out of that game, though. I feel like we have to mention the fake punt.
I feel like we're doing everyone a disservice if we don't mention the fake punt.
If you haven't seen the video, go see it. And look, I understand.
It's all over social media. It's all over the internet. It's easy to find.
And I'm just going to say this right now. People need to realize, because I've seen a lot of articles, SB Nation, and some other Bleacher Report and some other have called it the worst fail ever on a punt fake. No. I'm just going to go out. If you haven't seen it, it's not. Yes, it failed in the sense that that Arkansas State threw an interception. But let it be known that the play itself was actually not that big of a fail, outside of the fact that the punter is not a good quarterback, which shouldn't surprise us all. The fake, the guy is actually open that he's supposed to be throwing it to, and the guy who plays the feigning goat, Booker T. Mays III, is supposed to be. He's an ineligible receiver, so they decided that that's an easy way to make sure he doesn't go downfield, thus causing a penalty, thus negating the possible completion of a punt fake. So it's actually just a fun, smart way to keep your guy from committing a foul. But if you haven't seen it, go see that, because despite how the game turned out, that is a very fun moment to watch, and it's produced a lot of fun photos online. The one where he's fallen off the steel cage, is one of my favorites.
I love the Lance Stevenson photo where he's falling down and Lance Stevenson's blowing on him.
Yeah, I like that one. And then there's also the one where Antonio Brown's kicking him instead of the punter. That's a good one. I have one. I had one, and you can find it on Twitter, but I'm not going to mention it because apparently enough people didn't think it was funny. But I thought it was hilarious. But go find my Twitter because I think you'll enjoy it. But yeah, so those were our games this week. Not a whole lot of surprises this week in our pick'em. Looking at the standings and not the standings, but the rankings. Patrick, I'm just going to ask you real quick a couple of teams. Do you think they're ranked where they should be, or are they are they a little overrated? I'm just
gonna say, I'm not even gonna give explanation. I'm gonna say either too high, too low, or where they need to be.
UCLA at number 12.
Too high.
Too high. I think for right now, yeah, I have to agree. Stick right there. Georgia at number 13.
I'm gonna say a tad bit too low.
Okay. South Carolina at number 14.
Tad bit too high.
Notre Dame at number 9.
I'm going to say a little bit too high.
Okay. You're not going to catch any arguments from me there. Let's see. A couple more. Oklahoma State at number 25.
Too high.
Really?
I'm going to say too high.
You may have to explain yourself a little there.
I don't know. I think it's just purely in the top 25 team.
See,
if it was middle of the year, and they continue their success, and they're probably in the top 25.
See, I actually think they could be. I actually think they're a little bit low. I think they could be a little bit higher than that. I mean, you look at the game they gave Florida State. I think they deserve to be a little bit higher up there compared to some of these teams. Let's see. I mean, I think that's really pretty much the only ones that are just kind of. I don't know. Oh, apparently, North Dakota State got some AP votes.
Good.
North Dakota State has 3 AP votes this week.
I hope they continue to get AP votes.
I do too. That's a good football team. Despite the fact that they're in a lower division, that's a good football team. Yeah. Let me ask you this too. Last one. Texas A&M at number 6.
I'm gonna say too high, but not by much. Not by much.
Well, and they've even got 3 first place votes.
They're not a first place team.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say this early in the season because you look at your undefeated teams that are in the top 10, and I'm just going to go in the top 10. Obviously, you got Florida State, Oregon, Alabama, Oklahoma, Auburn, Texas A&M, Baylor, LSU, Notre Dame, and Ole Miss rounds out your top 10 with your undefeated teams. I don't know. It's hard to say because I don't know if they should be lower than that, but at the same time, I don't know if they should be that high either. So
yeah, they're one of those situations where
I don't know who would replace them at that spot necessarily.
Yeah.
But they don't seem like they should be the number 6 team in the nation. and they also don't seem like they should have 3 first place votes.
Yeah, the first place votes would throw me off. Six I might be able to handle, but the first place votes, no.
Yeah, but hey, that's I think that's a good catch up on where we are at this point in the season. We're going to take a real quick break, and then we're going to come back with this week's picks. So we'll be right back. All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Even though that was probably like a 20-second break for you guys, it was a lot longer break for us. So, hey, let's get right into it. Making the picks for this week in college football. If you haven't already seen it on Twitter, we have already posted the picks on Twitter. By the time this show's out, they'll be on Facebook as well. So make sure you go there, make your picks for the week, so that you can get those on there, so that you can get officially in our Pick'em sort of challenge for the year. I'll just mention our records. Pat, you and me are both 10-10 in the first 2 weeks overall, so that's not terrible. Our buddy Cam is 9-11. Sean is 11-9, and Garrett, who just started last week, is 5-5. So we're all kind of sitting there right in the same winning percentage. So keep those picks coming in, and we'll keep this thing going for the rest of the year. But we got 5 games in the college football rankings, or in the college football schedule for this week. So let's start off with the Thursday game. You've got number 5 Auburn against number 20 Kansas State. Patrick, tell me who you got.
I have Auburn winning this game. That's no surprise to anyone. I think Auburn is going to be able to run the ball very efficiently, whether it be with Marshall or with Artis Payne or with anyone else on that explosive Auburn offense. And Kansas State has kind of lost their luster as far as a Big 12 marquee team. Snyder's kind of fallen in the realms of recruiting and things of that nature in the past. You put that into perspective, along with the fact that Auburn is just not only an incredibly explosive offense, but still one of the favorites to win the SEC again. I think it's a no-brainer that the Tigers are going to win this one, and probably win this one by a couple touchdowns.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. I'm also picking Auburn. I just think, kind of like you said, I think they're just a better team all around. And so there's no reason to pick Kansas State. Even though it's in Little Manhattan, the Little Apple, I don't think that Kansas State's going to have enough to beat Auburn. I think Auburn's got too many weapons on offense. They're a solid enough defense. I don't think Kansas State is going to be able to put a whole bunch of points on it. So I am also taking Auburn in that game. Let's see. Another game we got on the schedule, Florida taking on number 3 Alabama. Patrick, who do you got there?
That one's going to be a really fun game to watch. I think Florida is going to have a big chance to put Alabama's first loss on the board, but I think Alabama has a quicker offense than a lot of people give them credit for. And not only that, but a solid defense as well, like they always do. Taking into account that they're also playing in Bama, which I don't know the last time Bama lost at home, but it doesn't really happen that often. So I'm going to give the slight edge to Bama. They're about a 2-touchdown favorite. I'm going to say they win by 10.
Yeah, it's not going to be a blowout. I'll put it this way. I don't know enough about this Florida team yet to say that they are good enough to go in and beat a team like Alabama. At the same time, do I think Alabama's as good as they've been in the past years? No, I don't. I think they've had better teams over the last couple of years. But I do think that this Bama team, at least at this point in the season, is probably still good enough to beat this Florida team. So I am also going to pick Bama. We're not going to be too different there. I think you look at what they've done so far this year, and Florida kind of still being a question mark team. I think Florida is a perfect question mark team. They could win the SEC East, or they could lose 5 or 6 games, or they could lose 2 games. I'm just not sure yet, and so I'm going to pick Bama to win that game. Next game, this one's going to hit a little, for us, close to home, sort of, because it's a game involving maybe 2 teams that you wouldn't expect to be on this list that we would pick. But one of our college professors has some ties here and used to always talk about one of these teams. So we've got New Mexico State on the docket for this week. Of course, Lobo Land being the one of Dr. Levetter's favorite schools. And he used to always bring it up all the time. And since it's a rivalry game this early in the season, I thought we'd bring it up. So, Patrick, who are you picking in this game?
Ooh. I never thought I would see the day where I had to pick between New Mexico and New Mexico State in my entire life. In case anyone was ever wondering what the records were for these 2 teams, let's just throw them out there. We have New Mexico with an 0-2 record, New Mexico State with a 2-1 record. Shout out, over 500. This is just a real tough one.
What do you got?
I don't know who to give the edge to, but I think I'm going to give the edge to New Mexico State to pull out. Would you consider it an upset in any sort of way?
Yes, I actually think I would.
What, a little bit?
You know, we put this game in here, and it is kind of a tough one to pick. New Mexico State is a Sun Belt team. New Mexico is a Mountain West team, so you kind of automatically assume if you have those kind of conference biases that New Mexico is going to be a little bit better team. I'm actually going to pick New Mexico to win this game, I think. They've both played UTEP, so they've played a common opponent, which is kind of nice. They both lost to them, so that doesn't help out too much. But you look at last week, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago now. New Mexico's coming off a bye week. They played Arizona State 2 weeks ago and played pretty well against them, played okay against them. And they played a little bit better against UTEP than New Mexico State did. New Mexico State isn't going to be looking ahead, but they do also have LSU next week, so they might be caught looking ahead. But it's a rivalry game, so records go out the window. I'm actually going to go with the win for Lobo Land.
Win for Lobo Land.
So I've got New Mexico. You've got New Mexico State, correct? You're sticking with that?
Correct.
Okay, good. So that brings us to another game that's actually very close to us, and it's Arkansas State, Utah State. Who you got there? In what is unofficially being called the Adam Kennedy Bowl.
You know what's sad, though? The fact that Adam Kennedy is not even going to show up.
Well, he's in Europe right now.
He is in Europe right now. Doing what? I don't know, but he's there.
So I'll give him a little bit of break. He's in Europe.
But, you know, this is a tough one, just not because of the fact that we are alums of a certain school, but it's because of the fact that you don't really see ASU lose at home that much.
Yeah.
And when they do, it's usually against one of those marquee teams. I mean, they usually do have one game where they slip up and they shouldn't lose, whether it's a South Alabama, Western Kentucky, one of those games, or usually it's bad special teams that cause them to lose. Shout out, we have bad special teams.
Very bad.
So I'm going to give Utah State the slight edge and win this game.
Well,
in Jonesboro.
Well, you know, you brought up a couple good points. One, obviously, it is in Jonesboro, so I think that helps Arkansas State out a little bit. Again, we've got a common opponent, and it's hard to do the common opponent thing. We both played Tennessee, And so, take it or leave it, Utah State lost a little bit worse to Tennessee than we did, I think. But so kind of throw that out the window even. What I think this comes down to is that Chucky Keaton isn't going to play. He is, as far as I know, he is still injured, and he's still not going to play. So I think that definitely gives the advantage to Arkansas State. And being at home and coming off of a not great performance at Miami, and a not great performance at Tennessee. I think this is the week that Arkansas State finally starts putting it together and finally starts playing solid football, as opposed to, hey, let's get 15 penalties in a game. So I'm going to pick Arkansas State. I know that sounds homer, but I do have, as obviously as I just stated, actual reasons. So I'm going to say Arkansas State wins that game. I think it'll be a good game, and I think it'll be close. And I think if you aren't a Sun Belt fan, if you aren't a Mountain West fan, that's a good game to watch, because those are two really good teams from those conferences. So I think that's kind of a sleeper game to pick or to watch. So that brings us to our last game in the pick'em for college football this week, and that's Clemson versus Florida State. Now, we've got some big news coming out today that Jameis Winston is going to be suspended for the first half. Patrick, does that change your pick at all?
As much as it would love for me to change my pick, because of the fact that I'll admit, at first I could not stand Jameis Winston. But then he made some TV appearances. It seemed like he was changing his attitude. It looked like he was maturing in front of our eyes while he was doing interviews and whatnot. And I was thinking, maybe after a while, if he continues to mature, or maybe I can like him. Then he pulls this idiotic stunt that I've never seen in my entire life. We were in college. We didn't see anything close to what he did, which made me just, whatever hope in humanity I had for him, gone out the window forever. That being said, at Florida State, they have a backup quarterback who's probably better than Clemson's quarterback. I'm not saying Clemson's bad, just saying Florida State's really good. Plus the fact Jameis Winston's still going to play second quarter, or second half, for that matter. So I'm still picking Florida State.
Well, I think this is a tough game to pick, because you look at the way Florida State's played already this season. And you want me to be honest? I don't think they're as good as they were last year. I don't think you look, okay, they beat Oklahoma State, but they struggled. They beat the Citadel, but they probably didn't beat the Citadel as badly as they should have. Now, there's that whole question of should they have beaten them as bad as they did, or worse than they did. It's hard to say. I didn't watch that game because it's the Citadel, and so why would I? But what it really comes down to is what's the score going to be at half when Jameis Winston comes in, and I would almost question that. I wonder how, if Florida State goes down early, if Jimbo Fisher goes ahead and brings Jameis in, because I don't think that Sean McGuire, who's their backup quarterback, is that great of a quarterback. Now, you look at his career stats. Obviously, he played a lot in mop-up games, but he's only thrown for 144 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. And that strikes me as a little bit of, I don't know what to think of that. When you've thrown 2 interceptions and you've only thrown 21 pass attempts, that's not good. So, I don't know how much that's going to affect him. I don't think this defense is as good as it was last year, and I think that could be where the problem is. So, I'm actually going to say that Clemson wins this game. I'm picking Clemson, and I think it's going to be close, but I think Clemson's going to win it in the first half, and Jameis Winston is going to be the reason why they lose, because he didn't play the first half. Now, that being said, I still don't think Jameis Winston is as good as everybody thinks he is. But I do think he's definitely better than their backup quarterback, and I think he's good enough to bring them closer to the game. but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a 14-point game at half in Clemson's favor.
Answer me this question before we get off.
Okay.
Are we seeing a system offense in Florida State flourishing in front of our eyes? You see, we've seen E.J. Manuel, who second year in the pros, so we don't really know for sure. We can't put a yes or no as far as a great NFL career.
I think it's entirely possible. You look at Christian Ponder. I know that's where you're going. You look at Christian Ponder comes out. Christian Ponder was good in college, hasn't been good in the NFL. You look at E.J. Manuel, it's kind of iffy, but at the same time, kind of very up and down. I think you're seeing what you're seeing is a series of system quarterbacks who. It's not so much a system quarterback like the old Florida days with Danny Warfel and Rex Grossman and those type of guys, but it is enough of a system that it's making these quarterbacks better than what they actually are, I think. Now, that being said, I think Jameis is probably the best of those three, but I don't think that means he's been the best quarterback for the last 6 years of college football. I don't think he's necessarily even the best quarterback in last year. I don't think he's necessarily the best quarterback this year. I think there are some other guys who are actually a better quarterback than him, but because of where he's playing, he's looked a lot better. I may catch a lot of flack for that, but I absolutely think. I think when you see a program that has multiple good quarterbacks in a row, and then they aren't as successful when they leave that program, you have to wonder a little bit if it is a bit of a system. And granted, all quarterbacks that go to good schools are going to be systems of being at good schools. You look at the USC quarterbacks when they were at when Pete Carroll was at USC, same kind of thing. I think it's going to be kind of similar to that with these couple of guys here at at Florida State. I couldn't think of the school name for a second. So yeah, I do think it's a little bit of a system, but not too much of a system. So, hey, you know what? Let's switch gears real quick and recap last week's NFL before we move on, because I'm just going to be 100% honest. We all did terrible picking this last week. I went 0-5. You went 0-5. Cam went 0-5. Sean went 0-5. Garrett went 2-3. So, congratulations, Garrett, on being the only person who got anything right in the NFL. But yeah, we did awful, and I think that says something about how big of a question mark the NFL is this year. Outside of, you thought going in that Seattle was just going to go. It was hard to not look at that team and think they were going to go 15-1 or 14-2, and that's still possible. I think they could still go 15-1, but I think it's also possible that maybe they're not as good of a team as we thought they were. It's still too early to say that, but there is that possibility. You look at it, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 teams left that are undefeated, I think. And out of all those teams, Denver is probably the best team that's still undefeated. Your other undefeated, you got Houston, Cincinnati, Buffalo, Arizona, Carolina, and Philadelphia. I think Denver and Philadelphia are probably the only ones that have a shot at doing anything, at probably winning over 9 or 10 games out of that list. So, take it for what it is. It's early in the season. I'm trying to think of the games that we picked. We had, obviously, Seattle loses to San Diego in a game that it kind of felt like Seattle was asleep for a good chunk of. I don't know if they were, but they kind of just didn't wake up until the second half. San Diego wins that 30-21. I'm actually I was on the wrong week of what games we had. You look at Detroit, Carolina. Detroit loses 24-7. I think that one surprises me probably the most.
Yeah, we saw Detroit have an outstanding offensive game against the Giants, which a lot of people will this year. But then you turn around next week against a great Carolina defense, and you see them struggle quite a bit. They didn't really build a tempo for an offense till late in the game. By the time they did, it was kind of too late. And then with Cam Newton coming in this week, where Derek Anderson started last week, Newton was a little bit rusty the first half, which it was his first time. I don't know if he played any preseason, though. It could have been his first NFL action this year. So, obviously, with the injury, not playing preseason, that was going to happen. That was expected. But second half, he came back. Very great second half. Probably the Cam Newton we're going to see all this year. So, while Detroit surprised me, Carolina did not surprise me at all.
Well, I think the surprising thing, kind of along the lines of what you mentioned, it wasn't so much that Carolina played good, it was that Detroit didn't play a little bit better. But then at the same time, we've kind of seen that over Stafford's career there, that they're kind of up and down. So I guess that wasn't too much of a surprise. Atlanta loses to Cincinnati 24-10. I think we just all kind of got hopped up on that first pick, on that first week, with how well Atlanta played. And I think a lot of people thought, oh, Atlanta's at home and they're playing Cincinnati. Who was the home team? I don't even remember who the home team was in that game.
It was Cincinnati's home team.
Yeah, Cincinnati was the home team. I think we just all thought that the way that Atlanta had won the week before meant that they were a lot better team than they were, and I think we kind of maybe just got a little high on their horse. They lose 24-10. I think the trick is here that New Orleans just isn't as good as we thought they were.
Yeah. New Orleans is a team that everyone just kind of chalked in for the Super Bowl automatically. Everyone thought that they improved their defense. They signed Jerry Bird. They made some other additions. And they thought that Vaccaro would be one of the anchors of their defense. We saw Champ Bailey didn't work out as far as that signing. He was cut before the season started. But it's just year in and year out, we see an explosive New Orleans offense, but we see a terrible defense. And no matter what they do, it just never works out. It's always the same problems. And so even Cleveland found out a way to expose that defense and get a win.
Yes, even Cleveland, for our good friend Roger. Roger didn't know what to do with himself this weekend. He's a Hogs fan.
They're not used to winning.
He's a Hogs fan and a Browns fan, and they both won this weekend. So I don't think he quite knew what to do this week. Our other game that we haven't, our other two games we haven't mentioned, Philly comes back and beats Indy in what I'm sure was a heartbreaker for you, Patrick, to watch. Philly just seems like they don't play in the first half, and then they're like, oh, hey, by the way, we're a good team.
It's kind of like they're over there smacking on some sandwiches, reading a good book with some tea or whatever first half. Then they kind of like look up over at the clock and like, oh, wait a minute.
Oh, we're playing again.
We're losing by like 3 scores. We may not need to go out there and play.
Yeah, I think that's a scary team if you want looking forward, because they're in a weak division, and you watch that team, and if that team keeps playing like that, if they start playing in the first half and the second half, that's a scary team. I love the combination of LaShawn McCoy and Darren Sproles. I think that's the Darren Sproles pickup was huge for them.
Fantastic.
So I think that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Although in Indy's defense, Trent Richardson had his best game as a Colt, his best game as an NFL player. I think
very well the other day. I'm quite surprised.
I think that was a matchup of two really good teams. So a good close game, Monday night game, a lot of fun to watch if you were a neutral. Our last game, Chicago goes out and beats San Francisco. And while I'm not surprised San Francisco lost, Kaepernick threw 3 interceptions. I think we might be finally seeing the good Jay Cutler. Now, granted, knock on wood, it's 2 games into the season, but we're finally starting to see Jay Cutler play a little bit better football than we're used to seeing Jay Cutler play. Is that going to hold up for a season? Probably not.
I don't know. I'll tell you one thing. That first-round draft pick of Kyle Fuller, exceptional pick.
Yeah.
He comes in with whenever Charles Tillman injures his bicep out for the year. So Fuller steps in, 2 interceptions. I think when you have a guy like that on your team, it's easy to have some confidence in order to win some games.
Yeah. So I think Chicago's a team to watch out for. The NFC North, outside of Minnesota, which with their lineup issues, it's the nice way to put that right now. That's going to be a fun division to watch. Chicago looks good. Green Bay looks decent enough. And Detroit up and down, but they're going to be that's going to be a fun battle to watch. So keep an eye on that. But hey, we're going to take a break so that we can pick next week and give you some fantasy info for the next week. So we'll be right back. All right, guys, welcome back to the last segment of probably the last segment today of Matty Ice and the Chief. We're going to move along into our picks this week for the NFL. We're going to give you those fantasy football picks and sleepers and starters and sitters for this week as well. But hey, let's start off let's start off with an NFC West matchup. In our games to pick, we got San Francisco taking on Arizona in a big division game. Who you got in that game?
Ooh. This is a tough one to pick. Going into the season, I did not have Arizona as high as I thought that everyone else thought they should be, just considering their defensive injuries and whatnot. And I was higher on San Francisco than everyone else thought they were. Everyone else projected they would kind of have a down year, which, I mean, they're 1-1 right now, so you can't really say they're having a down year. I am going to surprise some people. I'm going to pick Arizona this week. I think with Arizona's secondary being as good as they are, I think they can expose Kaepernick kind of like Chicago's did last week. I think that Arizona has started to regain their explosiveness on offense with Ellington, Palmer if he plays, either him or Drew Stanton, which I don't know how well Drew Stanton is going to be. He did end up securing the win for Arizona, so you can't say Drew Stanton is a winning quarterback. But with him, Fitzgerald, Floyd, I'm giving the slight edge to Arizona. Probably a field goal wins that one.
Yeah, you said you were going to go with probably the pick that most people wouldn't. I'm actually picking Arizona too. I'm not and I haven't been sold for the last 2 years on Colin Kaepernick. And so despite our good friend Chris Grady being a 49ers fan, I'm picking against them. I think Arizona they're playing at Arizona. I think that gives them a little bit of an edge. And I think, kind of like you mentioned, the defensive backfield's played well so far for the Cardinals, and Kaepernick hadn't. And then it's kind of one of those, until Kaepernick proves this year that he deserves to be chosen, I'm going to keep picking against him, I think. So I think Arizona's going to win that game. I think it's probably going to be a 7 or 10 point game, like a 20-10 or a 17-10 sort of game. It's going to be one in those ranges, but I am going to give Arizona the edge on that game. I don't trust San Francisco yet this year. I picked Arizona to be ahead of San Francisco, and I think this is one of those games that they're going to kind of that's going to help to pull them away. So that's that game. In another game, we got an NFC North Division game, Green Bay versus Detroit. Who you got in that game?
I'm going to give the edge to Green Bay in this one. Their defense was very, very slow to pick up the game this past week against the Jets. But Rodgers was able to make the comeback and get the win against Geno Smith, which is could make a bold prediction about that, but I'm not going to today unless you want to hear it. But I think that Aaron Rodgers is going to be able to pick apart that Detroit defense, which I'm not really sold on. I think they have somewhat of a weak secondary that a lot of people aren't really discussing. May end up being discussed after Aaron Rodgers gets done with them. I have Green Bay winning pretty easily.
Well, we've got our first disagreement in the NFL. I'm actually going to go Detroit on this, and I think I think this is going to be a very good close game, and I think they're going to split the season series. Detroit's the home team, and that's really kind of the only reason they're getting the edge in this one. I think we're just going to see Detroit continue the roller coaster that seems to be their seasons the last couple years, and I think they're going to win this game. You look at Detroit's offense. Obviously, they can throw the football really well. You got Joe Bell. How have we decided we pronounce his name? I hear it pronounced everywhere.
I've heard joke.
I've heard it about
everything
18.
Else.
I've heard it about 18 different ways. Well, we've got Bell and Bush coming out of the backfield catching balls. Obviously you got Megatron. So that's a very, very good offense. Golden Tate, it makes that offense even better. So obviously I like the offense there. Playing at home at Ford Field, I'm giving them the slight edge over the Green Bay Packers, who I just question their defense as well. I think you're actually going to see some rushing yards. Detroit's going to be able to run the ball on them a little bit this week, which isn't necessarily what you expect from Detroit, but I think that's what's going to happen, and we're going to see Detroit win that game, is what I think. So let's kind of keep it in the north. We've got Chicago taking on the New York Jets, the New York Football Jets. Who you got in that game, Patrick? It's our Monday night game. I feel like we always pick the Monday night game. I feel like you kind of have to.
Well, the Monday night game is awesome.
It's the Monday night game.
Is always a fun to watch.
Yeah, it's the Monday night game. You got to pick the Monday night game. Who you got in this one, though?
They're not going to put Houston and Raiders in the Monday night game. I mean, come on. But
Houston's 2-0 though, so
Houston is 2-0, leading the division. Sadly,
take that, Indy.
0-2. I got you.
Sorry, Patrick.
You're just
a little bit. I'm sorry. Chicago, New York. We're talking Chicago, New York Jets. Who you got?
Not Chicago, New York here. I picked Chicago in this one. Chicago, they did very well last time they were in prime time. Going to be in prime time again. We're going to see that secondary flourish once again. They're going to pick apart Geno Smith. They're going to prove that Geno Smith is not franchise quarterback.
Amen.
And I think Chicago wins this one pretty easily.
I'm going with Chicago as well. They played good last week. Their defense did. Jay Cutler played pretty good last week. I think that's going to continue. I don't think that New York's that good of a football team. Look, I've been saying about Geno Smith since before he was drafted that he wasn't a franchise quarterback. And if we had recorded podcasts back when he was in college, I don't think we ever did.
We wanted to, but we never did.
I would have told you then not to waste a pick on Geno Smith because 2 years down the road, you're going to need another quarterback. So obviously I can't pick him against that defensive backfield, that secondary that played really good against Kaepernick, even without Peanut Tillman. So I'm going to say Chicago in that game as well. Even though that's in New York, I'm picking Chicago on the road to win that game. So, hey, let's go to another division battle now. In the NFC East, which has kind of seemed like the NFC least for a while, but let's go there. We've got Washington taking on Philadelphia. Now, I'm going to go ahead and preface this with the reason I think this is going to be a big game. Actually, I'll just go first this time. The reason I think this is actually going to be a good game is because I think Washington is better with Kirk Cousins than they are with RG3, which means I think this is going to be a better game than it would have been if RG3 was starting. That being said, I'm still picking Philly. because as I stated before when we were talking about the recap, I love this Philly offense right now. I really, really like it. I love Darren Sproles coming out of the backfield and catching balls. I love LaShawn McCoy touching the ball, period. So I really like this. Now, the question is, are they going to play a full game? Can they finally put a full game together? I don't know. This is a good team to put a full game against because that defense isn't the greatest. But I think with Kirk Cousins playing quarterback this week, the entire game, I actually like Washington's chances a little bit better. Still going with Philly, though.
I'm going against you. I'm going Washington. And not only because of Kirk Cousins, I'm going against with them because of Washington's defense. I think they're a lot better than people give them credit for. I think that with everyone being healthy this year, you got a Rakpo in, you got Kerrigan back in with 4 sacks alone last week. Plus the safeties and corners playing well. That line is incredible. I think the defense is going to help them win the game against Philly.
Yeah,
not to mention Kirk Cousins.
Hey, I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be close. And if Washington's going to win, granted, I think because this game is in Philly, that gives Philly a little bit of an advantage. If this game were in Washington, I might give Washington a little bit more of a chance. Granted, it's hard to say anything about last week because they did play Jacksonville. And so it's hard to know how good you are when you play Jacksonville the week before. Well, and they play Houston to open the season. And again, that's hard to understand how good, because we don't know how good Houston is yet. Obviously, Houston has a good defense, has a great defense right now. And so it's hard to really judge off of that. I think Philadelphia has a little bit too much firepower. I think, though, what we're going to see is that, once again, we could see them kind of push the limit a little too much. And I'm still picking Philly, but I am saying, in terms of an upset alert, I'm putting Philadelphia on upset alert. Because I think with Kirk Cousins running that offense, if Philly lets Washington get out in the lead and Washington's playing good defense, we could see them struggle to come back. Kirk Cousins is a pretty good game manager. We could see them, Philly, run themselves out of time and not catch back up. So I'm still picking Philly, but I'm saying, Philly, you're on upset alert this week because Washington could beat you if you're not careful. So, sure. So I like your pick, actually. I'm not. That's a good pick. If you're going to pick something other than me on this one, that's a good pick for you to go with. So look, our last game of this week in the pick'em, the last big important game that we're picking is a rematch of the Super Bowl from last year. We've got Denver taking on Seattle. Patrick, who you got?
You are not going to like me today.
Bring it on.
I do not have Seattle winning this one.
Okay.
Strictly because of the fact, if this was a Super Bowl rematch, I would pick Seattle easily. No contest. Why? Peyton Manning is not the best playoff quarterback. But let me tell you what, Peyton Manning is one of the best regular season quarterbacks to ever play this game. And guess what? They're playing Week 3. That means Week 3 is during the regular season. That means Peyton Manning is going to be Peyton Manning, and he's going to win the game for the Broncos.
You're going to make me sound like a homer here, but here's...
You can't argue that Seattle just absolutely won't win this game.
Well, no.
You can't.
Here's the deal. I'm going to be a homer in the sense that I'm picking Seattle, but the reason is because they're at home. They don't lose at home. Now, I understand they lost last year to Arizona at home, but that's it. They don't lose at home. So I think you look, that defense is going to be licking their chops. Is Wes Welker back this week?
Wes Welker's back this week.
Is he playing? I think if
he'll play.
I think if anything, that helps Seattle's chances even more because I think it's going to take just a little bit to kind of get him back in the offense. And so I think, I think Seattle's going to play good enough defense that they're gonna go in there and hold it out. I think you're going to see Seattle play a little bit better offense. I haven't really heard if if Marshawn Lynch was hurt, he didn't really carry the ball that much last week. I know they kind of talked that maybe he was slightly injured, so that may have been part of the reason why. But I think you're going to see him bounce back and have a good week. I think Russell Wilson, he had a good week last week, but I think he's going to have another good week. And I just think you're going to see a team that is going to be ticked off that they lost last week, and they're going to come back and play a lot better game than they did last week against San Diego. And so I think Seattle, that plus them being at home, means Seattle's going to win. Fair enough, right?
I mean, you can't argue against Seattle winning in any game.
Well, and I would say it's a toss-up, but not preseason, regular season, it probably is a little bit of a toss-up as compared to the Super Bowl game. But it's hard for me to pick. It's hard for me to pick Denver, knowing what Seattle did last year to them in the Super Bowl. It's hard for me to pick Denver because I don't think Denver is a better team this year than they were last year necessarily. I don't think they've improved enough, and it's still so early in the season to know how much they've improved. So I think Seattle's still just a little bit better team. So I've got Seattle. You've got Denver in that game. So we're a little bit different this week. I've got Detroit. You've got Green Bay. I've got Philly. You've got Washington. You've got Denver. I've got Seattle. So we're a little bit different this week. We usually aren't that different.
We usually it's about one game, but we've got 3 this time.
So we'll see. We'll see who comes out on top. Speaking of coming out on top, I am not on top of our fantasy football league, Patrick. I'm 2-0.
I lost.
I'm 0-2 in this league.
So am I. I'm also 0-2.
What's interesting about this is I'm undefeated in almost every other league. I think I only have one loss in my other leagues combined, and I'm 0-2 in this league.
I lost again in this league. I've got one of my big leagues that I'm in every year. I'm also 0-2 in that league. But other than that, I'm about 2-0 in probably every other league. It may be 1-1 in a league.
So for Patrick's sake, we might want to skip this next segment where we talk about fantasy start sits and sleepers. But in order to maybe help Patrick out, we're going to go ahead and do it anyways. So Patrick, let's start with our starters. Who is your player that you should start this week in fantasy football?
It's not a player. It's players. You heard me raving about Washington's defense. I'm going to rave about them again. You need to start Washington's defense against Philly's offense. Not because Philly's offense is bad, just because of the fact that I think Washington's defense is just that good. And while they may score, they're still going to give you positive points, probably as high. They're probably going to give you maybe that 10-point range that you're going to want from a defense. So I'm going to say start Washington's defense this week.
Okay. You surprised me on that one. I would probably reserve that more for a sleeper pick, but hey, do what you got to do. My start this week is actually going to be Lamar Miller. I know some people have him on the bench. A lot of people probably had him on the bench the last couple of weeks. He did have a minor ankle injury towards the end of Sunday's loss to the Bills, so that might affect whether you're wanting to start him or not. But we have to remember that Noshawn Moreno has just been ruled out for this week. I'm trying to remember who they're playing. Kansas City this week, who hasn't looked that good. So I think he's going to have a big game, probably in the 13 to 18 point range. So look for Lamar Miller. If you don't, especially since running backs seem to be dropping like flies, if he is a free agent, for sure pick him up and go ahead and start him. I think he's a good guy to start this week. So I'm saying start Lamar Miller, and let me just remind you that last week the person that I told you to start, Arizona's defense, got 17 points. So you might want to listen to me. It did better than Patrick's, who got 0.
Yes,
a little bit over there. But Patrick, you were right last week. You said to sit Jamal Charles, who ended up with 0 points. Who are you sitting this week?
Well, I'm telling you to sit Monty Ball, playing against Seattle's defense. As we all know, great defensive line, great linebacking core, incredible safeties. There's just no weaknesses on that defense. And Monty Ball, while he's a great running back, he's going to obviously have trouble playing against Seattle. In Seattle, I'm telling you to sit Monty Ball this week.
Yeah, that's probably a good pick. I think Seattle's defense will probably be a good one to start this week, too, because they're going to be really – well, they won't be good to start because Peyton Manning's going to put up some numbers because it's Peyton Manning. But they're going to be a little upset after last week and probably play some pretty good defense. My sit is a little bit of a cheat because he's injured, but he is listed as questionable at this point, and he's projected to still get a lot of points. So I think people are going to want to start him, but I'm saying, like Patrick did last week, this week, sit Jamal Charles.
Back-to-back weeks, guys. Sit him.
Back-to-back weeks, sit Jamal Charles. He's injured, and you worry about how well he's going to be or how good he's going to be coming out off of an ankle injury. A high ankle sprain, they're saying it's not bad necessarily and that he's going to play. But Miami's got a decent enough defense that I think you need to sit him. I mean, look, Jamal Charles only has 2 points for the entire season so far through 2 games. So maybe he's not going to have as great of a season. Now, later on, he'll probably put up numbers. Don't get me wrong. But for this week, coming off an injury, sit Jamal Charles, I think. Patrick, you should take my advice because last week you didn't even take your own advice. And
I did not take my own advice.
And got 0 points out of the running back spot by starting Jamal Charles. So you might want to re-listen to this segment to this show once we're done. So Patrick says sit Monty Ball. I say sit Jamal Charles. Patrick, moving on to the sleepers. Who is your sleeper for this week?
My sleeper is DeAndre Hopkins. They may be playing in New York, where they're playing against the Giants. No one even knows who's playing in their secondary. And Hopkins looks like to be one of the main targets for Fitzpatrick. I think you're going to see it again. I can almost guarantee you he'll get a touchdown this week. So, sleeper, DeAndre Hopkins. Not a running back this week, guys. It's a receiver.
Yeah, that'll be New York's so terrible. That's probably a good pick, if nothing else, because of that defense is just so awful. As far as my sleeper, I'm actually going to go back to the Green Bay Packers versus the Detroit Lions this week, and I'm going to say your sleeper for this week is Joke Bell. I think you look at that team. He got a lot last week. I'm trying to think exactly how much he came out with yardage wise. I know he caught like 6 catches. Yeah, he had 6 catches for like 61 yards. He actually had 8 more targets than Reggie Bush. So a lot of people who have Reggie Bush start Reggie Bush. It's kind of they're almost 50-50. Maybe Joke Bell getting even a little bit more touches in terms of who's kind of the starter there. So I think you start him. Not to mention Green Bay, as I kind of mentioned, we were talking about the game. They're 31st in rush defense. So
it's bad. It's bad.
Their pass defense is 6 overall, but that partially had to do with the fact they played New York last week, the Jets last week. So I think with the mix of Detroit's offense plus how bad Green Bay is at stopping the run, go ahead and start Joke Bell. I probably in a flex position, probably in a running back position because most people probably don't have enough running backs at this point in time during the season because of how many of them are dropping, it seems. So start him, I'm thinking, because he's going to get points that you don't think he is. I think he's going to be in that kind of 15-point range like Lamar Miller is. So those are our sits. Those are our starts. Those are our sleepers for this week. Also, and we'll kind of mention, we won't spend any time on it because we got to go. We got to get out of here. But obviously, do not start Adrian Peterson. We're just seeing another guy in some trouble. Greg Hardy is obviously going in more and more trouble. We may or may not get a short up and talk about that more at some point in time here soon. But for sure, make sure you're not starting Adrian Peterson. because he is not playing this week. So follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. So go ahead and subscribe on YouTube. Like the videos. You can. It's not going to hurt anybody. Feel free. Make sure you're tweeting your picks at us, or you're Facebooking your picks at us, because we want to compete against y'all.
Before we go, I feel like we should give a shout out to our highest point total.
Yes.
For the fantasy league this week. So I can pull that up very quickly. Let's go to the scoreboard. Week 2. Let's see.
I can tell you
scoring. I can tell you who it is right now. My boy Austin Marks with 115 points.
Woo!
Just dominating. Everyone else had some low balling scores.
Oh, mine was I the lowest this week? I was pretty
64. Low. Barely.
Ooh.
Corey Snowgrove had 69. But Austin, you're killing it over there.
Yeah,
We're looking at you.
Fantasy, that league hasn't been great for me yet so far, but hopefully I'm gonna make a comeback and try and get in. So hey, we're gonna get out of here. We'll see you guys next week.
Oh, run! My tummy's rumbling. It's scary. Tommy's got the tum rums. In America, it's bling bling, but out here, it's bling bang, huh?
I already took what I call a wire shower. I rub my armpits with air fresheners. New car.
Oh yeah, I'm experimenting with some new entrepreneurial ideas. That one's called Sport for Thirds. Dress loud.